Multiband compression. I'm going to take you through a couple of different examples of where to use it and also why to use it. So if that's something you're interested in, stick around. But before we get started, here's the usual bit. If you do like the video, do hit the like. And also, if you want to subscribe to upcoming videos, and hit subscribe and notification bell, and I'll let you know when they come out. Also, if you want some free stuff, sign up to the main list below, and I'll send you some things you can use in your mixes, as well as an EQ cheat sheet to keep you on track. Welcome to my fifth and final video in the compression series. If you haven't checked out the other videos, go and check them out now. They're all available, starting with different types of compressor, how to use a compressor, parallel compression, and serial compression. So today we're going to look at multiband compression. What even is multiband compression? Now, there are a couple of ways to look at it. In some ways, it's like a fancy EQ. Because with multiband compression, instead of compressing the whole signal in one, you can split it up into frequency dependent chunks. So for example, if you want to compress just the low end more and leave the high end, you can do so, or vice versa, or anything in between as well. Perhaps there's just some frequencies in there that you really want to capture. Now, why would you want to do that? Why do we not just use an EQ and then use a compressor afterwards, or even the other way around, or even both? Well, the good thing about this is it's not compressing as a whole and it's not EQing as a whole. It's only reacting to certain frequencies when they get to a certain level. One big example of a kind of multiband compressor is a de-esser. With a de-esser, the plugin will concentrate on certain parts of the frequencies. So in that case, the sibilants, the S's, the T's, that sort of thing. So when a singer is getting a little bit too aggressive on those particular sounds, the compressor is going to work and it's going to start pulling those frequencies down, but only there. If it was working on all the frequencies across the board triggered by the S's, then it means that it's going to bring the whole level down every time there are sibilant sounds. That was intentional. Whereas with a de-esser or a multiband compressor, if that's what we're specifically using, it's only going to bring down those frequencies when it gets to a certain threshold. So when they hit, when they're too loud, that's when it's going to start bringing down just those frequencies, leaving the rest of the signal untouched. So I'll give you one example just before we dive into the practical side. And this is something that I read about that Nicki Shakes did. When he was mixing the album, or I think it was specifically a single for Jake Bugg a number of years ago, he was saying how he had a little bit of a problem with the voice, where when Jake was singing more softly, he had quite a full, rich, warm voice. But when he started to get louder, the mid-range started to get that much more aggressive, and essentially the tone of his voice did change a little bit. So he couldn't just apply an EQ across the board, and he didn't want to just automate an EQ to just pop in and out when he was singing slightly differently, because it's a performance, so it was somewhat unpredictable, and it would just been very, very hard to automate that. So using a multiband compressor or a dynamic EQ, very, very similar things, he was able to just concentrate on the offending frequencies, and when they would start to get too aggressive, the compressor would start to bring down just those frequencies, leaving the rest of the sound unaffected. So in my first example, I'm going to look at something very similar on the vocals, and then after that we'll move on to the bass. So here it comes. So I've got a track loaded up. This is an artist I worked with a little while ago called Nicki Shakes. Fantastic artist, fantastic musician and songwriter. If you're interested in a little bit of country pop, then go and check her out. I'll leave the details in the description. So let's just have a quick listen to what we're working with so you get a bit of an idea. Okay, sounds wonderful. So the point of using this multiband compressor is to clean it up before it gets into any other processing like EQ and compression, all that sort of thing. I happen to be using the Waves C4, but you can use any multiband compressor you like. There are so many on the market, and there's always one in your DAW as well, so you can always use a stock one. I just happen to quite like this one. Now, what I'm aiming to do is to keep clarity mainly in the mids and the higher mids. So in a similar way that I was saying about the story I told you about Nicki Shakes when he was producing Jake Bugg, in different parts of the song, in different parts of the register of the voice, you're going to have a little bit of a build up in, especially in the mids. And this is a good way to try and clear it up. So So what I'm doing on the C4 is just concentrating on a few bands. Now, just so you have a little idea of what's going on here, you've got 4 separate compressors. C4 compressor, 4 compressors. Get it? And you can adjust all of them independently in any way you like. But just be careful when doing so, because if you get a bit too drastic on one and not the other, sometimes you can have phasing issues, especially if you're working on a full mix as opposed to just a singular instrument. But we're just concentrating on vocals for now, so a little bit less to worry about. So in this case, I'm not paying too much attention to the low end, like beneath 90 hertz, because not a lot is going on there anyway. So it's really these other bands that I'm concentrating on. So this mid part, so I've set it up so we're going anywhere from about 90 hertz up to about 2K or thereabouts. And if I just solo that band, I'll show you what's happening in that area.
So lay down beside me and tell me that you want me.
So there's quite a lot going on there, and as you can imagine, there's a fair amount of taming there which will need to be done. As it stands, I've just set it up so we're bringing down that level by about 3 dB or thereabouts at some of the loudest parts. Let's just do a quick before and after.
So lay down beside me and tell me that you want me for tonight. I'm yours.
So it's just taking control of that just a little bit. And then as we go up, the next one we've got the high mids. This is mainly going to be where some of the harsh frequencies might live and also some of the sibilants. So I'm using this partly as a de-esser, but also just to stop some of those high mids cutting through a little bit too much, especially in the areas where it starts to get a bit more aggressive.
So lay down beside me and tell me that you want me for.
Okay, and then moving on, we've got the high end, which isn't doing too much, but I'm just doing a tiny amount on there too. As you can see, it's not doing too much there because I don't need it to do as much. This is the whole point of multiband compression. You can focus on just the areas that need work. So if we just focus on this little area here, and you'll listen before and after what the multiband compression is doing, there's a little bit of build up in the low mids there, which could do with just being scooped out a little bit, but not throughout the whole thing. Just at this part where it's just hitting that part of the register, just in the chest there. So let's listen to that.
Tonight, I'm yours. Tonight, I'm yours.
See, it's just cleaned that up that much more. Give that one more time.
Tonight, I'm yours. Tonight, I'm yours.
And now that we've done that, this is where you can then continue doing the other processing that goes on. So this is where you do further EQ. But the good thing about doing that now is you've got a much more even, a much more controlled, and a much more just consistent level to deal with. Not just in terms of volume, but in terms of the frequencies within the signal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this now in context, in addition to the EQ that I have following it, just to give the vocal just a little more definition and to just pop out in a mix a bit more. In conjunction with the two, it really does make a big difference. So let's just check that out. Without.
So lay down beside me and tell me that you want me for tonight. I'm yours.
Now I'll pop that back in so you get an idea of what it's doing. And there you go. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of how useful it can be just to clean it up before you do any further processing. Let's move on to bass. Okay, so now on to bass guitar. Let's just have a quick before and after. Really try to pay attention to the low end of it. You might need speakers or headphones for this. So hopefully you notice there that it's just a subtle amount, but it's just bringing in some of the low end a little bit and just keeping it in check, essentially. So all I'm really doing is I've got the C4 again. What I'm focusing on is more the low end here. So it's the low end because they're the longer waves, they're in terms of frequency, they're the ones that are really going to trigger a compressor. So those are the ones that really need to be kept in check more so than the high end. So I've got from all the low mids and below. So it's about, we can go from about 400 or thereabouts. And if we just take the gain off first, I'll show you what's happening down here. So as you see, it was compressing, so it's bringing the signal down by about 6 dB, which is quite a lot. Now, we don't necessarily want that to go. We just want to take control of it. So yes, I've compressed that, but now I want to bring the level up too. So I'm going to bring that up about a similar amount. In fact, we can do it from here. There we go. Right, now we've got that in check. Let's just look at the high mids. So this is where you're going to get your kind of clicky sound or the presence of the bass. And we'll hear just a quick before and after of what's going on there. Okay, so a much more subtle amount there, but that's because I didn't need quite as much control. All I want to do is try and keep some of those clicks in check, just so it kind of irons out some of the inconsistencies in the playing. That was me playing, so it's definitely inconsistent. And now I'm not doing anything on the top end because the bass isn't really doing too much up there, so it's not really too much of a problem. So I'm just bypassing that one. So if we just hear that before and after. Now you notice it's fairly subtle, but what it's doing is it's essentially stopping some of the low end to just get away from you. It's keeping control of it. It's keeping it nice and tight. So then when it goes into any other processing, it's going to be in a far better state. Let's just hear that in context with the drums, and you might be able to notice it just a little bit more. And there you go and try that out. So there are two examples of where to use multiband compression in a mix. There are so many different places you can use it. It's not limited to those two. They're just two that I happen to use. But the main takeaway from it should be that I use it to essentially control the signal before I do further processing. I use it as a means to shape or clean up whatever I'm using it on before I add further EQ and of course compression. And it can be really handy to solo those bands to hear exactly what's going on in a frequency of each signal, because then you might start to notice which frequencies are really jumping out, and more importantly, at which part in the song. Sometimes in a chorus, for example, the singer might get that much more aggressive, and therefore some of the frequencies start to build up in certain areas, might be the high mids or whatever. So using a multiband compressor allows you to automatically control those before they get out of hand, and then therefore before they go into further processing. So I hope that's been useful. This has been the final part in my series on compression. Go and check out the other ones if you haven't already. But that is it for now. Thanks very much for coming. I had a lovely time. Bye for now.